Welcome back to the HealthStream channel. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and unlock a world of health and wellness insights. It's like your backstage pass to feeling fantastic. Today we're diving deep into something that'll perk up the ears of all you coffee lovers. The interesting connection between coffee and your glucose levels. We'll be looking at research and expert insights to see just how this beloved beverage might be swaying your blood sugar and what we can do to keep those levels steady throughout the day. And joining me for this deep dive is, well, a true connoisseur of all things health and wellness.
It's great to be here.
Now, I think many of us have heard some mixed messages about coffee over the years, but the research is looking pretty positive, right?
Yeah, definitely. Coffee kind of gets a bad rap sometimes, but overall studies suggest it can actually be a healthy part of your diet. In fact, research has shown that regular coffee drinkers may even have a reduced risk of getting type 2 diabetes.
Okay, that's music to my ears. I can't imagine starting the day without my cup. But what's the science behind that protective effect?
Well, there are two main things happening. First, coffee seems to increase fat burning in the liver.
Oh, interesting.
Which is good because it helps protect against non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a condition that's unfortunately becoming more common.
Right, so coffee is like giving our liver a helping hand.
Exactly. And then second, coffee may actually reduce stress on the beta cells in your pancreas, the ones responsible for producing insulin.
Right.
So that helps them function better.
Wow, so coffee is supporting healthy insulin production.
Yeah.
That's key for regulating our blood sugar.
Precisely. But of course, while coffee can add to a healthier lifestyle, it's important to remember it's not a magic cure. A balanced diet, regular exercise, and managing stress, those are all still crucial.
Right. Coffee can't do all the heavy lifting. But it is encouraging to know that our favorite morning ritual might actually be doing some good. Now, something that might surprise you is that even black coffee, with absolutely no sugar, can sometimes cause a small glucose spike in some people. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, and it does seem kind of strange because black coffee doesn't technically have any sugar in it. However, this spike is likely tied to our body's stress response.
Oh, so it's not the coffee itself that's raising glucose directly, but our body's reaction to it.
Exactly. Coffee can temporarily increase stress hormones like cortisol, and cortisol signals your body to release stored glucose into your bloodstream, for quick energy, even if you don't need it right then.
Oh, that's interesting. Like our body's getting ready for fight or flight, even though we're just peacefully enjoying our coffee.
Yeah.
So if coffee can sometimes trigger that stress response and a glucose spike, are there any ways to minimize that, especially for those of us who need that morning caffeine boost?
For sure. There's a really interesting study that looked at the timing of when you drink coffee, particularly for people who wake up feeling tired.
Ooh, I'm all ears.
So this study found that if you haven't slept well, drinking coffee after breakfast instead of before can significantly reduce the glucose spike caused by that meal. We're talking up to a 50% reduction.
Wow, so just changing when we have our coffee can make that much of a difference.
It's pretty amazing, right? And it's really important because a big spike in the morning can set you up for a glucose roller coaster all day, leading to, energy crashes and cravings, all those unwanted things.
Yeah, nobody wants to be on that roller coaster, so delaying that first sip until after breakfast could be a game changer. But what about people who don't eat breakfast?
That's a great point. This really only applies to breakfast eaters. If you skip breakfast, no need to worry about this particular hack.
Got it. Okay, so we've talked about the effects of black coffee itself, but what about all the delicious things we add to it? Does that change things when it comes to glucose?
Oh, it absolutely does. What you add can significantly impact its effect on your blood sugar. Let's start with the most obvious one, sugar.
All right. Seems pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Sugar equals a spike in glucose.
Exactly. It's a simple carb that quickly breaks down into glucose in your bloodstream, causing that rapid spike, especially if you're having it on an empty stomach.
Okay, so sugary coffee drink first thing in the morning is probably not the best idea for glucose control.
You got it. Now let's talk about milk. This is where it gets really interesting. Different milk choices can have totally different impacts. Let's start with oat milk, which is super popular these days.
Yeah, oat milk's everywhere. I see it in every coffee shop. But is it actually a healthy choice?
Well, here's the thing about oat milk. It's basically liquid starch.
Liquid starch. Never thought of it that way.
I know, right? And remember how we said starch breaks down into glucose? Well, oats are a grain, and like all grains, they're packed with starch.
So that creamy oat latte could be a sneaky source of glucose and those unwanted spikes.
That's right. And those spikes can be pretty big, especially on an empty stomach.
Okay, so maybe oat milk isn't the best choice for glucose control. But what if you just can't give it up? Any tips for minimizing its impact?
If you love your oat milk, the key is to have it after a meal, not on an empty stomach. Having it with or after food will help slow down the release of glucose.
So oat milk after breakfast, not before it. Got it. Now, what about other milk alternatives? Any of them better for glucose?
Nut milks are definitely the winners here.
Nut milks to the rescue.
Exactly. Almond milk, pistachio milk, coconut milk, macadamia milk, all fantastic. Nuts are naturally high in protein and fat, and both of those help keep your glucose levels stable.
So the protein and fat in nut milks act as a buffer and slow down the absorption of glucose, preventing those big spikes.
Exactly. But there's one important thing. You have to be careful about added sugar.
All right. Hidden sugar is everywhere.
It's true. Many coffee shop nut milks have added sugar, which kind of defeats the purpose if you want stable glucose.
How what?
So always check the ingredient list and look for the unsweetened varieties, especially when you're making coffee at home.
Unsweetened nut milk check. Now, we've talked about plant-based milks, but what about good old dairy milk? Where does that fit in?
Dairy milk can be a good choice, especially whole milk. It's naturally low in sugar, and the fat content actually helps slow down the glucose release.
So whole milk is back in the game.
It seems so. And you know, it's interesting, skim milk can actually cause a bigger spike than whole because it doesn't have that fat to regulate things.
Wow, so taking the fat out of milk actually makes it worse for glucose control. That's surprising.
I know, right? It just goes to show that sometimes our attempts to make things healthier can actually backfire.
That's a great point. Now, for those who want to avoid both sugar and milk, are there any other ways to add sweetness or flavor without spiking glucose?
Absolutely. There are some really good natural sweeteners out there that won't mess with your glucose levels. Stevia is a popular one. You could also try cinnamon or even cocoa powder. Those add a richer flavor.
Cinnamon and cocoa powder in coffee. Sounds delicious.
Yeah, they can add a really nice depth of flavor without the blood sugar roller coaster.
Okay, so we've covered timing, sugar, and milk.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else we need to think about when it comes to coffee and glucose?
Well, there's one more interesting thing we should touch on, the origin of the coffee beans.
The origin of the beans can affect glucose response. That's so interesting.
There's some early research that suggests it might. A small pilot study looked at how different coffee bean origins impacted blood sugar levels.
Okay, so small study, but potentially big implications. What do they find?
So this study followed just one person, so we can't jump to conclusions, but they did find that beans from Kenya led to smaller glucose spikes compared to beans from Tanzania and Ethiopia.
Wow, so maybe there's something to this whole bean origin thing.
It definitely needs more research. Just imagine if we could figure out which bean origins are best for glucose control.
That would be amazing. A whole new level of coffee customization. There's clearly so much to learn about this drink. It's like a complex puzzle we're still putting together.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. It's all about uncovering new things and busting old myths.
It's incredible to think something as simple as a cup of coffee can have such powerful effects on our health.
I agree. It shows how interconnected our bodies are. Even small changes can make a big difference.
Now, for our listeners who are eager to learn more and optimize their coffee routines, what resources would you recommend?
Well, staying informed is key. Reputable health websites like the ones from major medical institutions or organizations like the American Diabetes Association, those are great places to start.
Any specific books or articles you'd suggest?
Oh, for sure. The Coffee Lover's Bible is a great one. It takes a really comprehensive look at everything coffee. And then there's an article called Coffee and Health, What the Science Says, which gives a nice, concise overview of the latest research.
Those sound great. And I know we mentioned a pilot study that looked at the impact of bean origin on glucose response. Any other specific studies you'd recommend?
There's a fascinating study called Coffee Consumption and Risk of Type 2 Diabetes that was published in a really well-respected medical journal. It's a landmark study that provides really strong evidence for coffee's protective effects.
Oh, wow. I'll have to check that one out. So for those who are just starting to pay attention to their glucose levels, what are some practical tips they can use?
That's a great question. First and foremost, be mindful of what you're adding to your coffee. If you're going for stable blood sugar, skip the sugar and go for those unsweetened nut milks or whole dairy milk.
Good point. And what about the timing?
Well, if you tend to wake up tired, try having your coffee after breakfast instead of before. It might really help reduce those morning glucose spikes.
And of course, everyone's body's different, so it's important to pay attention to how you feel and make adjustments as needed.
Absolutely. Listening to your body is key. It'll tell you what works best.
So essentially, it's all about being informed, making good choices, and finding a coffee routine that works for your taste buds and your health.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been a really eye-opening deep dive into this world of coffee and glucose.
Yeah, it's been great exploring this with you.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with? Any words of wisdom?
Yes, I think the main takeaway is to approach coffee with both enjoyment and awareness. Savor the flavor, enjoy the ritual, and use this knowledge to make choices that empower your well-being.
So just to recap what we've learned so far, black coffee by itself can be a healthy choice, but what we add to it can really make a difference when it comes to our glucose control.
Right, we've seen that sugar's a no-go if you want stable blood sugar, and unsweetened nut milks or whole dairy milk are better choices. And always remember to watch out for those added sugars hiding in those coffee shop drinks.
Absolutely. And if you're someone who wakes up tired, try waiting to have your coffee until after breakfast. It might really help with those morning glucose spikes.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll even be picking our coffee beans based on their glucose-regulating properties. That would be revolutionary.
Now that we understand how coffee affects our bodies, let's talk about why this all matters. Why should we even care about these glucose spikes?
That's a great question. Managing glucose levels is about so much more than just preventing diabetes. It's really about feeling your best mentally and physically all day long.
Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. When your blood sugar is stable, you have more energy, fewer cravings, and better focus. But when those levels are constantly going up and down, you experience things like fatigue, brain fog, mood swings, even trouble losing weight.
So it's not just about a number on a test. It's about how those changes make us feel.
Exactly. It's about having the energy and clarity to live your life to the fullest.
Makes sense. Now, going back to the benefits of coffee, you mentioned that it could help protect against non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, is a condition where fat builds up in the liver. And like I said earlier, research suggests that coffee can help boost fat burning in the liver, which could help lower the risk of getting this condition.
Oh, that's really interesting. So even though coffee can give us a temporary energy boost, it could also be supporting our long-term liver health.
That's what the research is showing. And that's why it's so important that research in this area continues. It helps us understand these complex and often surprising ways that coffee works in our bodies.
Speaking of research, what are some areas that scientists are really focused on when it comes to coffee and health?
Well, there's a lot of interest in understanding how the different compounds in coffee, like caffeine and antioxidants, actually create those effects.
Are there any other exciting areas of research you're keeping an eye on?
Researchers are also digging deeper into coffee's impact on gut health, the microbiome, and even cognitive function.
It sounds like there's still so much to learn about this drink.
Absolutely. That's what makes this field so fascinating. It's a constant journey of uncovering new insights and getting rid of old myths.
It really is amazing that something as simple as a cup of coffee can have such powerful effects on our health.
I agree. It highlights how interconnected our bodies are and how even small changes in our daily habits can make a big difference.
So for our listeners who want to learn more and improve their coffee routines, what resources would you recommend?
Staying informed is so important. Reputable health websites like those from major medical institutions or organizations like the American Diabetes Association, those are great places to start.
Are there any particular books or articles you'd suggest?
Oh, definitely. The Coffee Lover's Bible is a really great one. It gives a comprehensive look at everything coffee. And there's a great article called Coffee and Health, What the Science Says. It gives a nice, concise overview of the latest research.
Those sound really helpful. And I know we talked about a pilot study that looked at how different coffee bean origins affect glucose response. Are there any other studies our listeners should look into?
Yeah, there's a really interesting study called Coffee Consumption and Risk of Type 2 Diabetes that was published in a very well-respected medical journal. It's considered a landmark study that gives strong evidence for the benefits of coffee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You have to check that one out. Now, for people who are just starting to pay attention to their glucose levels, what are some practical things they can do?
That's a great question. First, be mindful of what you're adding to your coffee. If you want stable blood sugar, skip the sugar and choose unsweetened nut milk or whole dairy milk.
Right. Good reminder. And what about timing?
If you tend to wake up tired, try having your coffee after breakfast instead of before. It might really help reduce those morning glucose spikes.
And of course, everyone's body is different. It's important to pay attention to how you feel and make adjustments as needed.
Exactly. Listening to your body is key. It will tell you what works best.
So basically, it's about being informed, making smart choices, and finding a coffee routine that works for your taste and your health.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I think we've covered a lot today. It's been a fascinating deep dive into the world of coffee and glucose.
It's been great exploring this with you.
Yeah, I love that. It's not about, demonizing coffee or feeling like you can't have it. It's about understanding it better and making choices that help us reach our health goals.
Exactly. Finding that balance between enjoying it and feeling good.
And it's so empowering to realize that we have more control over our health than we think.
Oh, absolutely. Small changes can make a huge difference. And with coffee, those changes might be as simple as switching up your milk or, trying different beans or just changing when you drink it.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you.
Well, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into coffee and glucose. It's been amazing exploring this with you, and I know our listeners have gotten some great takeaways today.
It's been a pleasure sharing this with you, and I hope everyone feels empowered to make some healthy changes to their coffee habits.
Before we go, I want to remind everyone that we've put together a really handy recap PDF with all the key takeaways from today. You can find it in the show notes. It's like your guide to making smart coffee choices. Definitely check it out. And remember, we always encourage you to keep learning. There's so much info out there, and new research is always coming out.
So keep those glucose levels happy, and until next time, happy sipping.
Cheers to that.